start off like this.
Equivocado está de la vida, mi amor, que equivocado. Equivocado. Equivocado tú estás de la vida, mi amor, que equivocado. Equivocado tú estás de la vida, mi amor, que equivocado. Tanto tiempo detrás de la bebida, mi amor, hay que marear. ¿Qué me quería?
My name is Kirsten.
Equivocado. Equivocado tú estás de la vida, mi amor, que equivocado.
My name is Kirsten. I'm a junior at Macalester. I'm an anthropology major. My parents are Americans from the East Coast, and I was born in Peru and then lived in Bolivia and Ecuador until I was 7. Then lived in Canada for 3 years and then moved to Virginia. So home in the United States is Virginia, but you know, my idea of home is really made up of a combination of places. I lived in Bolivia and Ecuador. I've been to Peru. I went to Bolivia the summer before last, so in 2007. I've been to the Dominican Republic and to Mexico once also. Originally, you know, I was interested in sort of the encounters of different people and also just understanding how to see life through the eyes of someone else. And I think that has largely been influenced by my past. But I just think it's like a fascinating discipline, and even though doesn't necessarily have a lot of practical applications, I do think it is applicable to a lot of things in life in terms of the way you think about the world and, I don't know, just like a framework. Last summer I spent a total of 6 weeks in Peru, and I spent 5 weeks doing sort of an internship with a local nonprofit organization in the city of Tarapoto, which is sort of in the jungle region of Peru. And it's an organization that does different development projects. 3 different divisions within the organization, which was called CIVISA, by the way. So there was the environmental project group, the microfinance group, and then I was in the so-called social projects division. And that was headed by a woman named Macalester. So she was in charge, and she was also one of like the co-executives of the entire organization. The other executive, the director, was also a woman, so that was interesting. And most of the people that worked in the social projects division were women, but there were also several men that were involved. And each person was kind of in charge of their own mini project within that. The leader of our division, Marta, she was very radical politically. I mean, I think she defines herself as a Marxist. She was definitely very, I want to say, like goal-oriented and very motivated, and seemed very forceful, I guess, compared to what one might think of like the stereotypical Latin American woman, which was actually kind of contrasted with the other woman who was in charge, who was much more, I mean, laid back about the way that she was doing things. Other people would probably categorize her as being more like feminine, and Marta as being more like taking on male characteristics in order to be powerful. Well, it was good that I got to see various sides of these women. For example, Marta, the one that I told you that was very sort of like almost militantly political. Well, I mean, she wasn't always like that. So there would be times when we would be waiting at these conferences for the journalists to show up, because inevitably they would show up like 2 hours late to the breakfast. So we'd be sitting there, you know, just killing time, and they would just start telling me, sort of like keeping me up to date with all of the like gossip stuff going. And so then, you know, they would just like get really into it and be like cracking up about these little jokes that I didn't understand, so they would have to explain it to me about like, oh yeah, there was this woman that met this guy and then like fell in love with this other guy, and she explained it by like, oh, there was just like a clique and we fell in love, and so apparently this thing with the clique became like really famous, and everyone started being like, oh, it was a clique, and they made all these like songs. I don't know, it was just funny, but they like went on and on about all this other stuff, so it was really interesting. to not just see these like political sides of them, but also get to know them as like real human beings.
De pan y canela, cielo, a ver si se acaban todos los problemas jugando a la ronda pan y canela.
Yes, I took Lawi as my first year course actually, freshman year. I mean, I learned a lot in that course. When I came to Macalester, you know, I had personal experiences in Latin America from a very not political, very personal point of view of living there when I was a child, and also just travels. So I really wanted to learn more in an academic way about Latin America. Academic and, from a political science view also. So it was really informative in terms of like connecting sort of intellectual ideas about the place with my own experiences. So it was really useful in that. And a lot of the things that we read about, sort of the themes that I learned about in Lawi, have often come up since then, both in my classes that have focused specifically on Latin America as well as my experiences, so even while I was there. So one of the things that I took away from Lawi, that is definitely something that I learned specifically in that course, was sort of a theme in Latin America of women using their role as mothers and sort of extending that and politicizing it, and using their role as mothers for political ends, so that they're kind of extending the domain of motherhood so that they can still participate within that domain but in a political way. So the other thing that was interesting was the contrast between Syriza's projects in the social development region at least, and this other project that I went to the inauguration for, which I'll just go into detail in a second. But basically the contrast was that these projects that were headed by women in Syriza that were focusing on the sexual exploitation of children, especially women, of young girls, was related to children as well as health, which are two traditionally gendered female domains, versus this other project that I went on, which was about engineering and economic development as it related to sort of environmental protection and conservation as well. And when I went on that trip, I was the only woman, and the project was headed all by men, and everyone who was there to sort of meet them that were in charge of it at the community level were also all men. And I was very conscious of being the only woman there, and it was interesting that is, I would consider that's probably a domain that is not necessarily related to motherhood or necessarily like traditional women's areas. So that was definitely one connection that I saw with projects.
Llegó el flojo de Ramón a gozar.
There was one guy who was the youngest of the group, and he actually had a radio show, so one time he invited me to go on his radio show and they just like interviewed, I don't know, I think they just like, it was a novelty to have this like American Peruvian citizen on their radio show. But the other thing was that there was a city just like a little bit down the highway from Tarapoto, and it's like well known for various like traditional foods, and there's an indigenous population that lives there, so it's like a very well known kind of touristy spot. So he really wanted me to see it. So I had mentioned that I hadn't been there yet, and he was really surprised, and he was like, okay, we'll say that we're gonna go to this workshop, but actually we won't go, we'll just hang out in Lamas, which is the name of the town, instead. So then we went on his motorcycle, because everyone there rides like motorcycles, and there are no cars, so we like sped off on the motorcycle up the mountain to this town. We like drove around, and he showed me all the sights, and like we ate traditional food from this city, and yeah, it was fun. I was continually surprised by just how generous everyone was, like immediately once I met them. They really wanted me to like see the city and experience all of the things. So I went dancing every weekend, every day of every weekend. Every Friday and Saturday, yeah. Well, something that I always have liked, even though I wouldn't say it's not necessarily my personality, but I have always liked it, is the sort of physical proximity of people, and that it's normal to, obviously to kiss someone on the cheek when you meet them, but also just in terms of, when you're being friendly with someone, like touching their arm or like standing close to each other. I guess it just, in terms of friendships, it's a lot more comforting, I guess, and really makes it seem like the personal connection is that much stronger.
Que me voy nomás. Regálame tu alegría y deja ya la duda. Deseame suerte, eso me ayuda. Si quieres ven a bailar que yo pago factura. Deseame suerte, eso me ayuda. Y no me trates mi amor tan mal, porque no vienes tú también a volar. Mira, en el verano yo me voy pa' Cuba. Si hago dinero yo me voy pa' Cuba. Con 3 maletas yo me voy pa' Cuba. Sin tu permiso yo me voy pa' Cuba. Y si no vas te mando una postal.
Women are cool. Latin America's cool. Latin American women are cool.